Okay, hello everyone. I will begin with introductions. My name is Anna. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Family Equality's Associate Director of Archives, Storytelling, and Brand. So that means I'm facilitating tonight's discussion. And tonight we are going to be talking about Boyhood Reimagined, stories of queer moms raising sons. So a family with two moms raising a son seems pretty ordinary to many Americans in 2025. But with rising anti-LGBTQ plus sentiments on school boards and state houses alike, queer parents face ongoing and accelerating challenges to their families. Through a series of personal essays, interviews, and transcripts, Boyhood Reimagines asks questions about parenting and feminism during a time when traditional male dominance continues to shape societal expectations, limits opportunities for women and non-binary individuals, and influence political and economic power structures. Do queer moms practicing feminist parenting raise sons with a healthy relationship to gender and masculinity? Are sons of queer moms protected from a culture of misogyny? And what important lessons do queer moms of sons have to teach other progressive parents? To tackle these questions and more, I am joined by a special panel of authors and contributors, which you can see on our screen right now. We have Gail Marlene Schwartz, a queer mom, a dual citizen, and not a humble brag here, the pickleball champion of her household. Her adult novel, Falling Through the Night, won the National Indie Excellence Award for LGBTQ fiction and was a finalist for an Independent Publishers of New England Book Award. Other titles include My Sister's Girlfriend, The Loudest Bark, and Clementine in Quarantine. She is the co-editor of Boyhood Reimagined and a founding member of the magazine Hodgepodge Literature and Art. She also hosts the Substack Writers in Relationship. Gail lives and writes in Ottawa, Ontario, with her partner, visual artist Erin Needham, and their occasional roommate, Alexi, who is 15. June Blue Spruce lives with her wife in Seattle, where they raised their two sons, who are now grown. She has been an activist in movements for women's and LGBTQ plus rights and healthcare justice for decades. Her essays have appeared in Whiteness is Not an Ancestor, Essays on Life and Lineage by White Women, Sacred Stone, Sacred Water, Women Writers and Artists Encounter Ireland, Catamaran Literary Reader, the chapbook Coming Home, and Her Story. Her poems have been published in Sisters Singing, Blessings, Prayers, Art, Songs, Poetry, and Sacred Stories by Women. My Lover is a Woman, Contemporary Lesbian Love Poems, and Journals. Lalita Duperon was born in Amsterdam and now lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. She has a PhD in South Asian Studies and is the Associate Director of the Center for South Asia at Stanford. She has published 2 books and a number of articles on the song texts of North Indian art music. She's also currently working on a project on consent. In a separate incarnation, Lalita performs and writes comedy as Lalita D. She's a proud queer single mother by choice of a teenage son. Marie Holmes is a freelance journalist and fiction writer. Her work has appeared in HuffPost, Scary Mommy, Good Housekeeping, and The Washington Post. She has received awards from Guy Vault Press and the Bronx Writers Center, and was an Emerging Writer Fellow at the Center for Fiction. And last but certainly not least, just last in the alphabet, we have Catherine Mack, who is a professor of rhetoric in the English department at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where she studies a wide range of topics, including truth and reconciliation efforts in South Africa, motherhood and family in the United States, the genre and practice of life writing, and rhetorical pedagogy in the era of truth decay. Catherine has written From Apartheid to Democracy, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, and The Case for Single Motherhood, Contemporary Maternal Identities and Family Formations. So we have a pretty impressive panel, all right? That's quite a lot of accolades. I am so grateful you all are here. Welcome, and thank you for your time. Before we dive into the discussion, I would love for us to start on the same page, literally, with a reading. And I'm going to call out, I'm just going to pick a random order. Gail, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much, Anna. And a big, big, big shout out to Family Equality for being so game to collaborate and have this event. I'm very grateful. So, my essay is called The Salad Spinner Chronicles. And this is something that it was something that happened when my son was a toddler. And it was a very, very interesting period of his life where he was very enamored by women's work. So this is just an excerpt from the beginning. Lately, my formerly mellow baby boy has turned into a maniacally obsessive student of domestic life in our Montreal home. Considering his prior preoccupation with trucks, I'm guessing his developing character is flexing its yin muscles to, however clumsily, attempt balance. I should be overjoyed, but frankly, I find it more than a little disturbing. The first indication showed itself one day while I was baking muffins. Now, I wish I could say while I was repairing the leaky toilet or while I was putting in a new tiled backsplash, but that would be taking more than my fair share of artistic license. Alexi was rummaging through the Tupperware cabinet in the kitchen, the one kitchen cabinet my wife Lucy and I allow him to explore. I turned my back to grab the brown sugar when I heard a crash behind me. The three distinct parts of our beloved salad spinner tumbled across the bathwater gray kitchen floor. Then I heard a throaty cry that seemed to bubble up from my boy's innards and explode from his gaping mouth. But his expression wasn't distress, it was a scream of sheer delight and discovery. I looked at him confused, and then I picked up the plastic colander-like bowl. "This?" I said to him in disbelief. "This is what you want?" He smiled, pointed, and said, "Baba Wawa." Now, since this was Quebec and we never watched the program 2020, I knew he didn't mean Barbara Walters. Something about the salad spinner had attracted his attention, and it was clear that he wanted me to deliver it intact. Always open to new ideas, I put the three pieces together and placed boy and spinner in the gated play area. Pure joy ensued. For a good 2 months, the salad spinner fully occupied my son's leisure time. He never tired of pumping the spin mechanism, staring at the middle piece whizzing around, listening with fascination to plastic hitting plastic, pushing the black button that stops the action, and getting any adult with a free finger to click the white latch that locks the middle piece in place. Nothing, not a new-to-him drum, a Caillou plastic bath book, or even a walking, talking, programmable robot could woo him away from his new favorite toy. Nothing, that was, until he discovered the vacuum cleaner. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Gail. June, would you like to go next? You are muted, June. It's got to happen to someone.
I
It's good
thought I had
luck.
unmuted myself. Thank you. My essay is called Dykes Raising Sons. "Ooh, you girl," says one 9-year-old boy, taunting another in the next room. "Shh, my mom can hear you," says our youngest son. He knows what's coming. I stand in the doorway leaning on the jamb. The boys stop their play. One looks at me, curious as to how I will respond. Another avoids my gaze. My son tenses. "Calling someone a girl is not an insult in this house," I say in a matter-of-fact tone. It's what I say every time. I leave them to their play, quieter now. "I told you," our son hisses. My partner Martha and I birthed 2 sons at a time when it was a radical act for a lesbian to get pregnant. Our older son dove in first in January 1980, conceived by Martha using donor sperm and born at home on Capitol Hill in Seattle. Our second son came through me in November 1983, conceived using a different donor, born at a different home, but with the same otherworldly, miraculous energy. Life longs for life. Our home was full of it, bursting the seams of our bodies and lives, turning them inside out and upside down. Our lives as young, middle-class white women from mainstream Republican families had already been upended by the civil rights and anti-war movements, second-wave feminism, and queer liberation. We had moved far away from our families, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, to come out in the early 1970s. As young dykes, we asserted our right and ability to be independent from men. This was a renegade idea, as until 1974, banks could refuse a woman credit without her husband's signature. We lived in collective households with other lesbian feminists, rejecting heteronormative relationships and individualistic ways of thinking and acting, and trying to deconstruct sexism, homophobia, racism, classism, and capitalism. At the time, many women, lesbian and heterosexual alike, experienced and expressed anger at men in general. Sexism and homophobia ran rampant. In many states, marital rape was still legal and anti-sodomy laws were enforced. Our collective rage had a sharp edge, like new scissors cutting through outgrown clothing. Both Martha and I had men in our lives whom we loved. We believed that men were not doomed to be oppressive, they were taught to be. Now we were the teachers. After our sons were born, we wrestled with the question, how could we love them for exactly who they were, all of who they were, and raise them in a culture that disrespected and devalued who we were? How could we let them go to find their own paths, to challenge or conform to that culture? Our first answer was to love ourselves and them, to model kind love, fierce love, love that allowed for mistakes, including our own, which were many. We needed to manage our own stories and feelings, rage, pain, fear, despair, so that our sons wouldn't bear that burden. This is much easier to write than it was to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I love readings because you get something so different than, when you're alone in your room reading. Um, Marie, you're next up on my screen.
Okay. My essay is called Walking While Female, What I Want My Son to Know. I can take my shirt off too? My daughter asks. It's July, and we're on one of the shaded paths in the park. The trees' green leaves dappled with sunlight. She's 3 years old, and she's watching her 7-year-old brother tear down the hill in his swim trunks, shirtless. We've been creating and destroying water balloons at the playground, the kids slapping them satisfyingly against the fragrant black asphalt faster than I can tie the ends of new ones into knots around my fingers. Usually, I have them both in rash guards, pink for her, blue for him, a product of hand-me-downs and, ostensibly, their own preferences. But today, Max has been inspired to feel the air on his skin, and Olive wants the same. I feel a familiar twist in my gut. Of course, I say, my smile forced. Olive steps toward me, arms raised in a double salute, and I pull the stretchy fabric over her head. She takes off running after her brother. We haven't even gotten all the way down the hill before Olive's bare chest catches someone's attention. You're not allowed to go around like that, they say to her, though the comment is clearly intended for me. In my memory, the speaker is a man, but they could just as easily have been a woman. I must look at this person, I think. Do I smile? I do remember that my reaction was to ignore them. What did they say? Asks my son. He understands immediately the unfairness of his being able to go topless while Olive cannot. I tell him it's called a double standard, when things are okay for one group of people but not another. There are a lot of them for girls, I say. My daughter wants her shirt back on. My nonchalance hasn't fooled her. She doesn't want that kind of attention from strangers or from anyone.
Thank you so much, Marie. Lolita, you are next.
Thank you so much. I'll try and compose myself. You make me cry a little, Marie. That's a harrowing story, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. My essay is called Time to Change the Channel. There is a common misconception that boys growing up in a household with a lesbian feminist mom will naturally be feminist and progressive. I guess I labored under that misconception too. My son's conception was a misconception in so many ways, as it did not involve sex, an expectation of a traditional family, or even a second parent. Labor is a whole nother story. After the man-free misconception, I wanted a patriarchy-free labor. No OBGYN, no wires, no numbers, no drugs. The only man present at my son's birth was him, but I did not know that at the time. I had fought off the cultural expectation of finding out my baby's sex in utero. After he surfed out into the birthing pool I had installed in my apartment, I stared at him in amazement, primarily delighted that the mind-numbing pain of labor was over. It must have been only 10 seconds, but it felt much longer before my doula said, "It's a boy." As a single mother by choice, I deeply felt the enormous responsibility of raising a boy in the patriarchy we live in. From the get-go, I had an open-door bathroom policy. Surely there is no easier way for a boy to be comfortable around female body stuff than watching his mom sort out a sanitary pad. "Does it hurt?" he asked the first time he understood what blood meant when he was 3 or 4 years old. "Not really," I replied, "but I do get a little grouchy. It hurts my head more than it does my body." A few months later, when I was yelling at him for something inconsequential, "Does anyone ever yell about something that's actually important?" he asked me sweetly and innocently, "Are you having your period, Mom?" How to explain that? Yes, that is a compassionate way of trying to understand a woman's unpredictable mood swings, but no, that is not a question that should ever be asked. As part of my queer vision, I try to educate my son with consequences, not punishment. I tell him that there is no supreme male being who sits in judgment of you, but if you do X, Y will naturally happen. One day when my son was around 6, we were listening to the radio in the car and an Eminem song came on. I changed the channel. "Why don't we listen to that singer, Mom?" came the question from the back seat. "Because he beat up his wife," I explained. Silence ensued, during which I imagined my son was reflecting on the evils of domestic violence. Then the question, "But what did she do?" "My son, I think, when I put you in timeout as a consequence for a misbehavior, I tell you, I love you, but that is not acceptable behavior. You are a good person, but what you did was not good." Being versus doing. Actions have reactions. Behavior has consequences. But when a fully grown man beats up his wife, that is not a consequence. She did nothing to warrant that, and he is not a good boy who made a bad decision. He is an a-hole. So we are changing the channel. But is my teenage son able to change his internalized channel of which actions deserve reactions and which require judgment?
These are all such great. I'm so glad you all picked these excerpts because when I was reading, these were the moments that really stuck out to me. Thank you. Catherine, yet again, last but not least, go for
Okay.
it.
Hard to follow all of these amazing women. Okay. Uh, I think the title of my essay in the end was Making Invisible Work Visible. I'm not looking at the title right now. Okay. What parenting choices support the goal of nurturing this cooperative and contributive masculinity? And this is a question Anna had. Anyway. To start, I attempt to identify out loud life work, especially that which typically remains invisible. For example, I explain to my children that while it might seem that I'm just looking at my agenda, I am in fact thinking through the logistics of our week and thus cannot immediately answer a question. In other words, my brain is occupied with literally invisible work that remains so unless and until I name and call attention to it. I also sit down with my children to brainstorm the work that sustains our family, that of food, shopping, preparing, and cleanup. And I should actually include the cultivation of food, housework, organizing, cleaning, repairing, and our social life, coordinating, planning, and driving. We talk about what needs to be done, how much time it takes to do, and who can be responsible for doing what. I acknowledge that this work isn't always fun and that doing it lessens the time we have for other activities. But I always conclude with these questions. Who should do this work that sustains our family? If we don't do it, who will? I explain that each of us needs to pitch in so that we can do whatever fun family activity we have on the horizon. I tell them that I want to avoid becoming a martyr who is simultaneously resentful and concerned, that I'm witnessing, perhaps even supporting, the creation of entitled men. I know that they don't understand precisely what I mean. At times, they respond by running away as fast as their little legs can carry them. At other times, though, they respond with wide eyes and questions. What is a martyr? What does entitled mean? And then, after I answer those questions of clarification, not knowing how much of what I say has sunk in, they ask, what can we do to help? For now, this feels like a win. Okay, thanks. I'll end there.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love ending on a win. That's great. And as Catherine hinted, we'll be coming back to that idea of cooperative masculinity as we enter our discussion. I hinted at, I've been reading this book over the past several weeks. It's been really eye-opening for me. And so I'm excited to be chatting with you all. And I hope that our attendees are excited too, because while the chat is disabled, something I've learned, the Q&A is still open. So if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and I will move them into the rotation of the questions that I have. But selfishly, because I'm facilitating, I will start with the questions that I have. And the first is kind of the origin story. What inspired you all to contribute to this book, or Gail, in this case, as the co-editor, to write this book in the first place?
I can jump in. Most of my writing springs from direct experience, and the woman who I had originally co-edited the book with was an old friend of mine who also had one boy with her wife, and so we had these very parallel experiences. And during visits, we would be kind of comparing notes, and we both had our sons later in life. There was just a lot of parallels in our experiences, and we would talk a lot. We would be doing a lot of eye rolling, and there was a lot of parallels in terms of the places where we felt disconnected from our sons, and a lot of that had to do with ways that they seemed to embody this kind of energy that we didn't relate to as more feminine beings. And she's a writer as well, and we came up with this idea of maybe writing a book about queer women who are parenting sons. What was interesting about the project, though, is when we started doing research, we read Peggy Drexler, and we read lots and lots of queer women who had been doing this research on this very subject, on our kids raised by queer women, gay people in particular, in general, but queer women in specific, do they fare well? Are they healthy? And that question had been answered. So that really wasn't our focus. Our focus was more about this development of masculinity, and how does feminist parenting done by queer women, what's that about? How does that impact the boys? Does it facilitate a certain type of masculinity? Does it heal? What do we have? What do our stories in particular have to share with the wider world? And so we kind of put our heads together, and then we thought, let's get some more stories from other people, and that's how it started.
Does anyone else want to share, how they came to contribute? June, you've unmuted.
So my wife and my now wife, who was then my partner when we were raising children 30 and 40 years ago, uh, were among the first out lesbians in Seattle to conceive and raise children in this very, at the time, a very unconventional way. Um, and maybe among the first in the country, I don't know, but it felt as if I had something specific to contribute to the collection. And also that the questions that it posed are questions that just subsumed my brain and my life for 2 decades. And so it felt like a really important thing to contribute to. And I'm really grateful, Gail, to you for birthing this particular baby.
I well, I too found the questions extremely interesting, and I'm still thinking about them. I'm not partnered, and I I think for me, so this is not so much an origin story question, but I thought the questions were really important and interesting, and if I could be a part of something important and interesting, why not? I don't feel like my piece addresses the questions that I find the most that I'm still grappling with. I mean, I think the notion of invisible work is important, but more so, I don't know what I still don't know. I think my kids are maybe the youngest. My boys, my oldest is turning 13 this Sunday, and then my younger son is 9.5. And I'm curious, they just I think because they just see me, and maybe Lolita, this is something that will resonate with you. They just don't assume, one, that children need two parents or three or four, that one is good and other adults in their lives are important, but you really only need one dedicated parent. And they also just they see me doing a lot with the help of a lot of people. So I think just by example, they can't assume or won't assume things about what women need. Um, but I'm curious to hear from you other mothers, maybe of older children, at least June and Gail, you have a 16-year-old, right? So, I mean, a little bit up there. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned like the other people that are involved in um, parenting and not just, a partner, but like the village, right? The old adage, it takes a village. That's something that really stuck out to me in every single essay. Like a through line was that the village can shape your children for better or for worse. And we can start with for better. June, you talked a lot about the network of friends and gay men and community centers and schools and groups that really helped you to raise gender aware sons. I am positive this is a question on our attendees' minds. How did you all tap into those for better villages? Catherine, you mentioned it too, the people who are there to help you. Where did you find those villages?
I don't want to overspeak, but well, this actually raises a question because I remember when I will answer the question, but I remember when my stepfather specifically said when I had my first boy, and he said, "Well, who are the men going to be in his life? And how is he going to become a man without men?" And I remember thinking, and I still think this, I don't get that question. So the pressure I think that some people still exert on single parents or same-sex parents to provide a very strong and conscious model of the other gender that still exists and that still doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know how other people see that. I think, June, you do talk about providing specifically male role models for your sons. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I haven't made any conscious effort to do that. And yet there are many, actually, it's funny, men in my children's lives that I've just met through doing different volunteering work or neighbors or friends who come in and do different things with us or with them individually, but I haven't made a conscious effort to do so. So just happened.
Well, just to respond, when we conceived our kids, we were part of a vibrant, we still are part of this community 40 years later. Those of us that are still here, we're part of a vibrant and very interconnected, politically aware lesbian feminist community. And we really did focus on constructing our lives without men. We weren't separatist. We weren't, we didn't hate men or exclude them, but we really tried to build our lives around each other and with each other's support. When our boys came along, we really did feel like they needed more men in their lives, just to learn how to navigate their bodies, among other things, and which we really couldn't teach them in some ways. And so we looked for different ways for them to connect with men. And some of them were really powerful, and some of them, for various reasons that I describe in the essay, didn't really work out. The AIDS epidemic had a big impact on our lives at that time. Um, and then we found out who their dads were. And that's a whole story in itself. But it felt important to connect them with their dads, who were both gay men and both really wonderful, it turns out, really wonderful men. So I have a kind of a different story. But I do feel like there are lots of different ways that boys can have men in their lives. And it doesn't have to be a dad, it doesn't have to be in the more conventional way.
Yeah, I found, I worried a lot about finding, because there are not a lot of men in my life necessarily. Like, I was working as a teacher with mostly women. A lot of my friends were women. I was married to a woman, I'm surrounded by women. And then we had this little boy, and I was like, oh my gosh, who are going to be the men in his life? And I think what I've learned, he's 15 now. He's going to be 16 very soon. And as he gets older, I've found that it's not for me to find those men for him. Like, he finds the men that he has a connection with. And it's not necessarily who I think it's going to be. He had a male kindergarten teacher who he got along really well with, and I was like, this is perfect. And I don't know, I don't think, really looking back, that Max is going to be like, oh yeah, Mr. D was the man who had the most influence on me. I think, he found this Dungeons and Dragons group, and he plays with these guys who are his friends, and he has this dungeon master who he looks up to, and it's this very, like, gender bendy inclusive group that he's found this home in. And that's him. That wasn't for me to dictate.
Well, the other side of the coin that I noticed is that, there are these people that you uncover throughout parenting that are positive influences. And then there's this theme in a lot of these essays around, you nurture this really healthy sense of gender and masculinity in the first 3 years of your child's life, and then they go off into school or the world, and you suddenly lose control over the messages that they're consuming. What is your advice for navigating that tension. I know that some of that is included throughout the book, but I'd love to hear from you.
I'll take this one up for starters. Um, it's really hard. It's really hard, and I think accepting it is part of it. Like it's, I started perhaps when he was little, um, to push back, but you can't drown out the voices. So for me, and it also becomes very adversarial then. And I didn't want him to feel that the whole world is kind of against us. And it just didn't seem like a healthy message. And I also don't feel that way about the world. So it was really about modeling and just deconstructing. And rather than saying, oh, what you heard was wrong, I would just have conversation like today I read X, but actually I feel Y, and this is why. And just always almost like talking out loud, um, and speaking to him maybe like an adult, not quite. I mean, when they're 7, there's things they don't need to hear, but just always processing stuff out loud so that he just saw another way of thinking about things and another way of looking at things. My son is 18 now, to your question, Catherine. And, he's in that in between stage between kind of, puberty and adulthood. And he's very much a pandemic teenager. So that was very hard. So I don't quite know where he's going to land, but so far the signs are good. And there's a question in the Q&A around this, and we'll probably get to that, Anna. But um, when during Trump won, when he was kind of going into puberty and asking the puberty type questions, he said, "Would you still love me if I were a Trump supporter?" And I, I was like, "Of course. I mean, I would no longer cook your meals, but." I would love you because that is my job, and there's literally nothing you could do that make me stop loving you. But I've been thinking a lot recently about like sometimes I think when our children, no, let me just speak for me. I think when my son becomes the kind of man that I would not want him to be, politically or yeah, I guess that would be a good example, the supporting particular people in politics. Maybe to me, that is like what for other people it is to have a trans child or a gay child. I'm not making any parallels here. Those are not correct parallels. But in terms of the stab to the guts of, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with this. And we have to love our children. We have to love our children no matter what. And so yeah, I try and counter the messaging, but ultimately he's his own person, and I gave birth to him to be his own person, and that's it. That's it. We can hope for the best but maybe he's got stuff to teach me about, open. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But I have to love him for who he is because if I don't do that, then I'm just like everybody else that doesn't love their children the way they are, and that includes children that grow up with homophobia and all the other stuff. So that's where I land, and we'll check back with me in a couple of years how I actually did on that if things do go a little awry. But for now, we're good.
Yeah, I think so much of the book is kind of about like like I'm going to give you all the tools that I have, everything that I can do, and I hope you do something beautiful with it, but I don't have control over what it is that you do. Yeah, so I definitely got that.
I would love to jump in just for a second. I think this idea of nurturing the person's freedom, it's the scariest part of love, and I think it's the most powerful part of love, where you are saying you are a separate person, and that's meaningful. And that means I'm never going to try to, and of course we all break this all the time, but that's the idea. You're allowed to be different from me. So, and I struggled with that a lot. I still struggle with it a lot, and I fail more times than I succeed. But I think when I'm at my best, I think what I'm able to do is to really deeply respond to Alexei in his vulnerable moments when he feels othered, when he feels outsider, when he feels like someone's overpowering him. And then when something's going on later that is sort of demonstrative of toxic masculinity, I can pull his attention back to that moment and say, remember when you had that fight with your gaming friends and they left you out? That's kind of what I'm experiencing right now as a woman in the work, and to try to, again, with gentleness, with respect, with the idea I'm not going to ever try to force you to be, but again, I don't succeed, but that's the ideal. So to hold those two pieces and to relate and to filter everything through the loving bond of again, when he's at his most fragile, that I accept him, and when he's angry and says I hate you, that I try to understand and be on his side even in those moments. So to just hold that vulnerability, and that creates a kind of bond that can cause him to want to understand my point of view later. I don't know if that makes sense. It's a complicated way of putting it, but
Yeah, going back to dealing with, the influence of outside society, I was just thinking about we had a couple of incidents when my son was pretty little, where our babysitter, who we love, made a comment. One was about he had nail polish on, and she said, oh, that's not for boys. Um, and another time he was into My Little Ponies for a while. And he felt like he needed to hide them when the babysitter and her son came over. Um, and we didn't really feel comfortable, you know, chastising the babysitter. But we did talk to him about it and made it clear, I was like, I don't agree. I think anybody can wear nail polish. Like, and just to give him that sort of language of, okay, like, I hear you saying that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's information that I have to internalize, right? And, with the My Little Ponies, we were more like, that sucks. I wish you didn't feel like you had to do that, but I understand. Like, it's, you have control over what you reveal to who and all that kind of stuff, but just to let him know that it's okay to disagree with people, that he doesn't have to accept everything they say, and he also doesn't have to shout at them about it. It's a tricky equation to decide who to confront on at what moment.
I feel like this is a great um, pivot into one of the questions that an attendee had posed, because I feel like it's really related to this concept of, yeah, navigating these tensions. An attendee says, this talk is so timely for me as I just picked up the last of my youngest son's stuff from college, where he wrapped up his junior year. To me and my wife's surprise, he spent 2.5 years in a fraternity. Ugh. We had lots of conversations about gender, the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, and much more as a result. After joining the frat, he found himself posturing and spending a lot of time trying to fit in and outbro the bros. Our young activist and advocate found himself not being open about his two moms, so it's been a journey for us all. How can we keep the conversation going and keep us all growing together?
Well, I'm probably the only mom here with sons that old and quite a bit older actually, but I think the questioner had the answer in their question, which was keep the conversation going. And that's really all you can do. They, as I was listening to all of you and feeling like you're so eloquent, everyone has to live their own life. And we as mothers, as parents, give them whatever we have to give, and then they live their own lives, and we have to let go of them to do that and love them, even though sometimes we may strongly disagree with uh, the direction their life takes. So, but keep the line open, and I think they may be surprised at what happens. I mean, people go through different times in their lives where they have to express themselves differently. So,
I would also say, and this is not, again, not something I'm very good at, but to get curious about like what's drawing him to the fraternity, like to ask him, to solicit, what do you love about it? What do you get from it? So to join in and to see, everything's complex, everything's gray area. So there's something of value. And if we're not allergic to what they're doing, I think that again, that connection grows and there's more space on all sides.
I do think I absolutely hear what you say, June and Gail, and I said that earlier about the Trump example, but when your child's not out about you, that's hard. I haven't fully experienced that, but he's definitely when he was little, he'd be a little coy about it because I wasn't living with another woman. I did for at times, and then he was very open about having two moms, but when there wasn't the other person there, um, then it was fairly easy for him to just kind of pretend that he didn't have to out me, and there by himself. And I think he didn't mind that. And that hurt me. But I tried to just be in a space of compassion that this is, I mean, the scorn heaped on people for being gay and sometimes it feels like straight men, like that's their biggest fear is that people might think they're gay, like they could be anything but that. Like this push into straight masculinity is so strong that of course our boys are going to feel that. And so if they have to hide for a little bit while they figure it out, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm sure it's incredibly painful for the person who wrote the question, but I imagine it will pass, and it will definitely pass sooner with empathy rather than anything that's not. But yeah, definitely scream into a pillow. Like I'm not saying, like just move on. It's hard. It would be very hard for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to share my son was younger, so it wasn't quite as serious, but maybe a hopeful example of my son started a new middle school. So it wasn't the families that we'd known forever that we all knew everybody and everybody knew, we were the family with two moms, yada yada. It was middle school and we weren't present a lot. He was older, and at one point, we asked him like, because he wasn't telling us anything about his friends. He was like, do they know anything about you? Like, do they know you have a sister? Do they know you have two moms? And he's like, no, 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 I don't mention that. And we were like, oh, okay, whatever you're comfortable with. Like, and that, that was maybe sixth grade. And then by the end of seventh grade, he had an advisor who he really connected with, who was an out gay man. And they were having a conversation and advisory that touched on gay rights. And he shared the story of his family with all of his classmates. So he just needed time. He just needed time to get comfortable with those kids, and then he could share that information. So I think if we had reacted in sixth grade with what, like, why aren't you talking about us? That would have closed things down even more than sort of saying, oh, maybe like Gail said, curious questions like, what are you not comfortable sharing that? Why do you think that? Or even just giving space and being comfortable with a few moments of silence and seeing if kids want to say anything else, because they usually have the answers in them if you can sort of sit there quietly and help them draw them out.
I know for me reading this book, I don't have kids, but my wife and I are talking about that next step, and it's something that having boys, we're very like, oh no, what will we do? So this book was really helpful, and I kept kind of looking to it to be like, well, what's the answer? What is the one thing? And I say that tongue in cheek, but I did kind of find at the end of it that the answer was really just building trust. Like that's what every single thing boiled down to was, finding ways to make it so that there's a two-way line of communication that's always open. And I feel like that's being mirrored in a lot of your responses tonight too. So I just wanted to voice that paraphrase or that summary that I got, which is that yeah, parenting. So much of parenting is trust. And trusting too that it'll work out. Trusting too that like trusting yourself that you did something right. Yeah. Um, let's see. We have a few minutes left. If folks, this is your last chance to get questions in. I have two other questions that I can share. The first is that many of the essays I found were not just about raising gender-aware sons, but also breaking generational cycles of what you were taught about gender and the role that gender played in your own childhood. Um, does anyone want to speak to that journey? Does that ring true for any of you?
Well, I'm a child of the 50s, so I grew up in a very traditional household. Dad went to work, he was a doctor, mom stayed home, took care of the kids, took care of the house. Um, and the 70s and 80s were a big explosion of reaction against that. So that was certainly part of our raising our sons. And as when they were young, I started becoming aware of patterns of verbal and physical violence in my dad's family, which no one in that family wanted to talk about. But I just put a bunch of pieces together and started uncovering the impact of that on me. Um, and uh, I was never subjected to physical violence, but there was an emotional impact on me for sure. And I had to unpack that for myself and also how it affected my parenting in terms of my ability to be emotionally present and not yell at the kids and that kind of thing. So certainly that's relevant for me.
Well, with 5 minutes left, I have to ask this question because I'm just so curious. You have shared so much of your wisdom and insights in the book and tonight, but that learning goes both ways. So I want each of you to answer, if you can, what is one thing that your sons have taught you about yourself that you didn't expect?
I guess I can go first. This is not a happy answer for somebody who's thinking. Oh, and it's something I think that parents say generally. You just see it's not around gender. For me, it's just, oh, I am I am really uptight sometimes. I'm not patient enough. I mean, I think this is just standard. Every parenting magazine is probably talking about it. But your kids make you see the best of you, hopefully at times. And my children have made me see the parts about myself that I really don't like. So that's not about gender. Maricelo, sorry, that's my son right now, my middle, making noise. So anyway, yeah, but not around gender actually. I don't know.
I'll say one thing that my son has taught me about myself and has helped me see as really one of the best parenting tools that there is that I do have a sense of humor. And sometimes when there is a conflict, a little humor is the best way to sort of uh, de-escalate the situation. And now that he's a teenager, he likes to be very sarcastic. So we're sarcastic with each other. We have silly inside jokes. And so he's not sitting down and having hours long conversations with me because that's not really his style or where he's at in life. But we do have that way to connect, which was unexpected. I don't think of myself as a particularly like funny person.
I'm still formulating my answer. I guess I want to say something snazzy, but there's no snazzy answer to that question. I think for me, so I lost my mom when I was little. I don't have memories of my birth mom. And I really worried about that going into being a single parent in particular, like, how I was going to model this thing that I didn't know. Um, and I think I really came into my own. I think he's always been so reassuring about my parenting. I've talked about this with him his entire life. Like I never wanted to have the conversation like I had, this is what happened to grandma or whatever. So it was just always just part of the narrative that there was this kind of gap in the lineage. And he was just always very reassuring to me that you're a good mom, even at times, or especially times when I felt anything but, because parenting is so hard. And he showed me in a way that I'm nothing like my mother. And I mean, don't we all love to hear that? But he was very conscious of that I had this incredible hang up that I don't know how to do this. So I'm just trying my best here. And he's always like, you're doing great. And um, yeah, I think he has enormous, because I was so vulnerable with him about that, he has enormous compassion. And it showed me that weirdly, being a good mom is not that hard. It's like, I think we're so scared of it, but you just kind of have to be yourself, whatever that means, and to love them hard, and it will come back. And he's such a loving man, and I appreciate that so much about him. So yeah, that's what he's shown me. Do it, Anna. Don't be scared. Do it. And especially boys. I mean, any child is an amazing child. But you also have the power to make some changes for future generations. So embrace it.
I can jump in because I think that's the most powerful aspect of parenting is the potential for generational change. And two qualities that have been very highlighted to me since I became a parent are my insecurity and my creativity. And and because everything we are has a big impact on our kids, I've seen I've seen the impact of how insecure I am, and I've seen myself grow from that because I see the impact on him. And I don't think there would have been a more powerful force pushing me out of that. I mean, I'm still insecure, but I'm so much less insecure because of that. And then the creativity. One of the things that because I was a yeller, I have to admit I was a yeller, and he talked about, and he started lying because of it. He didn't want to get in trouble. So we talked about it. And he said, "I'm really scared of you, mommy." So we kind of thought about it together. And I said, "Well, can we have like a code phrase if you're in that you're afraid to say the truth?" And so we came up with this phrase, please don't be mad at me." And it was just a code phrase. So whenever he was in the position where he had to tell me something that I didn't want to hear, he would say, "Please don't be mad at me." And there was a switch that got turned off in my brain, and I had to just keep my cool. Sorry. I had to. There was no other choice. Okay. Just tell me the truth. And it really transformed that part of our lives when there was the potential for conflict. And he became much more comfortable to tell me all kinds of stuff that I didn't want to hear. And that was that creativity and the way that, again, that sort of pressure on this very fragile self to, and I wanted so much to be better because of him. So he really helped me uh, bring out some of that and decrease some of the other.
Well, I'll be brief at the end here, but my sons opened my heart to love in a way I had never loved before and never felt loved either in that way. And that just transformed my life. And also, my mother died in between the births of our two sons. And I was so grateful that our first son came along in time because I had not a somewhat difficult relationship with my mother. And I was relatively young when she died, not as young as you, Lavita, at all, but still in my early 30s, still kind of mad at her, you know. And my older son showed me what she did for me because I was doing it for him, and I was like, oh, I get it, you know, and I was able to be present for her in a way that I wouldn't have been able to be when she died. And it was really a beautiful opening between the two of us as well.
Gosh, I can't think of a more precious way to end. Thank you all for sharing and for being vulnerable and giving such great reflection, not just in this past hour, but in the book, which is available for purchase. So please go to your local bookstore and make sure that you have this on your bookshelf. I think it'll be a lot of what you just saw. So it's well worth the read. For those joining tonight, we have events like this all the time. Go ahead over to familyequality.org/events. You'll also find parenting resources on there, peer support spaces, and then opportunities to share your story like these wonderful folks here did. Is there anything you all want to share or promote before we close out? I always like to give the opportunity.
Just a quick plug, if you're interested in the book, if you go to our publisher's website and purchase it directly from her, it does benefit her and cuts out the middle person. So it's motinabooks.com. So I would just encourage people to, we're kind of trying to avoid Amazon and
Yeah, that's good to know. I will make sure that that is in the follow-up email to everyone too. So that link will be available to you all. Yes, June.
Just not just kinda trying to avoid Amazon. Sorry, just had to.
Yeah, let's put an underline on it. Yes, thank you. Anything else you all want to share before we close out?
just to thank you, Anna, so
Yeah.
much. Thank the Family Equality Organization and community for welcoming us. It's just been a wonderful. I was telling Anna before we started how I feel starved for professionalism, like dealing with lawyers for my mom, and to have somebody like Anna who's just so warm and responsive, it really reflects so well on the organization, and I've been very impressed. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for the time that you took tonight and all of our many emails and the time you took to write this book. I really think it'll make a huge impact on our families. So I'm really glad we were able to put a megaphone on it, and we'll keep sharing it out with our audience. Thank you, everyone who attended as well. I hope that you all have a good evening. I hope that our power stays on. We'll see. It lasted through the hour, so that's exciting. And if anyone needs anything, you know where to find us, familyequality.org. All right, thank you all. Have a great night.